So let's just find out where everybody is logging in from today. Looks like we have some latecomers. We had a lot of people register for this webinar, and just waiting for people to make sure that they're on. But for the people that are here already, maybe you could let us know where you're logging in from. Can you click to let us know if you're coming from some part of Canada or outside of Canada? Looks like we have completely 100% from the prairies today. That's great. Thanks so much for supporting us from the prairies, mostly from Alberta, I think. And here's another poll for you to practice clicking on. So we're just going to see why you're interested in this webinar. You can check any or all of the boxes that apply to you, and then this will give us a chance to see what interests people about the webinar. So please click. Okay, so it looks like it's personally interesting for everybody that's here. They want some clarity, and the topic is relevant for the organization. So that's really great. We have a few people that are also interested in hearing what other people have to say and just general interest. So that's good feedback for Adriana before she starts to speak. And so Adriana, I'm going to introduce her right away. I am very happy to be able to present today Adriana Tulisi, who is from the Students' Union Wellness Center at the University of Calgary. She's a very accomplished woman with many credentials. We were only able to put a few of them onto her bio here, and you got a larger one in the invitation that was sent to you. And so Adriana is the Community Engagement Manager at the Students' Union Wellness Center at the University of Calgary, and she manages health promotion, she manages training, marketing for the Wellness Center, and also she manages the Faith and Spirituality Center, where she provides support to students, staff, and faculty on interreligious and intercultural programming. So she's really well qualified. She has quite a number of degrees and international experience working with faith in the workplace, and she's one of the few people, I think, in Canada who has all of those qualifications. So the University of Calgary is very fortunate to have her, and we are really excited to feature Adriana on our webinar this morning. So welcome, Adriana, and I'm going to start the very first slide for you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Adriana Tulisi, as Marie mentioned, and I'm so happy to have all of you join me today. I know your schedules are very busy, and I do appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days to learn more about this. I do just want to start off with a bit of a personal story about how I got so interested in this topic. As Marie mentioned, one of my degrees, I went down to Denver, Colorado, and completed an MA in the history of Christianity. And when I was there, I was in an interreligious dialogue class, and I was learning about a variety of different ways that you engage in that type of discussion, those types of things. And then all of a sudden there was a company in Colorado Springs, which is just about an hour south of Denver, and they hit the news right near the end of our course. They had some employees who worked for the company, and they were receiving complaints from other staff about the, dirtiness in the washrooms. There was water all over the place. There were paper towels all over the place. And they found out that several of their Muslim employees were using their bathrooms to perform their ablutions, what they call ablutions, which is their feet cleansing before they observe their prayers. And the employer, instead of wanting to talk with their staff, decided to lock the bathroom door. And so what happened is many of the Muslim employees felt, well, geez, if I can't perform my prayers, then I'm not able to go to work every day. So the employees started not coming to work because they weren't able to perform their ablutions in order to perform their prayers. And due to that, the employer actually fired them all. And that's what happened. We tried reaching out to the company just to provide some support. Our professor did, and some of the students. And they weren't interested in listening and learning and changing their perspective. So that's something that really struck with me when I was there and really frustrated me. I felt very fortunate when I moved back to Calgary that we had protocols or procedures or laws in place to prevent that from happening. So that's really what kick-started my interest in this work. And so I just wanted to share that because I think all of us have a variety of experiences and concerns we have around supporting a diverse group of people. So I just thought I'd share that with everyone.
Adriana, before you go on to the next piece of your presentation, please, if you could just get really close to your phone and just almost feel like you're just yelling into the phone because we don't hear you as well as we would like to.
Okay. Is that better then?
Yeah, keep that up. That would be perfect.
Perfect. Sorry about that, folks. Okay, I see it here, Sandra. Thank you, Sandra. Great. So we'll get started with the presentation. So this is the agenda for this morning. We're going to talk a bit about what is religion. That's always a tough question to answer, but I'll try a little bit here. We're going to talk a little bit about the legal requirements, at least under the Alberta Human Rights Act, with the duty to accommodate. We're going to give some examples of common requests and responses about religious accommodation. And then I'm going to talk to you about the spectrum of observances, what that means, what that looks like. And then we're going to talk a little about, when in doubt, how you can ask. So that's what we're going to cover for the next few minutes. So I have both an undergraduate and a master's degree in religion, and almost every single class that I was in started off with the big question, what is religion? And let me just tell you, after all the courses, at least from an academic perspective, no one has been able to answer it. So it is a very complex topic. It's a complex idea. But at least for the purposes of what we're going to be talking about today, and at least for the purposes of your roles within your organizations, typically we understand that religious belief refers to a system of belief, worship, and conduct. You're going to see here on the screen there's a definition that the Supreme Court of Canada has defined. And I do just want to mention that it does include Native spirituality. The only thing I would just comment on this is just to be cautious around using always the word belief. There are a lot of Buddhists and Jewish folks who would use the term atheist. They actually don't believe in a deity but practice or observe their religious tradition. So we just really want to make sure that we just are welcoming to all ways that people observe and describe their religious identity. So that's a definition of religion. So I just want to do a little poll here. Are you guys able to indicate on here what you think the top 3 grounds for complaints that the Alberta Human Rights Commission received in 2013 and 14? So pick your top 3 that you think they received. Okay,
Adriana,
yep.
You could go ahead and comment on that. If you, what do you think about this? Do you think this is appropriate, or what were the actual answers?
So the actual answers, the top 3, the number 1 is physical disability. The second one is gender, and the third one is mental disability. Interestingly enough, with religious beliefs, it only accounts for about 4% of all the complaints that the Alberta Human Rights Commission receives on an annual basis. So I just thought that might be some interesting tidbit of information for everyone here.
That's quite surprising. I would have thought that race would have been right up there on the top.
No. Yeah, physical disability is definitely, year after year, when I worked for the Alberta Human Rights Commission, was one of the top ones every year.
And so Subi has just asked if you wouldn't mind repeating those stats one more time, and some people would like to write them down.
So physical disability, gender, and mental disability are the top 3. They account for probably almost 60% of the complaints.
Great, thank you.
Not a problem. So I'm just going to go over a couple of the guidelines around the legislation that the Alberta Human Rights Act talks about when it comes to duty to accommodate. So some of the responsibilities, and I'd actually really recommend, the Alberta Human Rights Commission does several workshops on duty to accommodate all over the province. So if this is something you're really wanting to learn more about, I'd really recommend connecting with them. So I'm just going to do a brief overview here. But basically, when it comes to duty to accommodate, the responsibilities on the employer's side is really to accommodate employees to the point of undue hardship. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what undue hardship is and looks like. But it's also a mutual relationship, and it's based on reciprocity. Employees are also responsible for ensuring they're treating fellow employees in a manner that's consistent with the law, for cooperating with the employer in accommodation requests, and providing the information when requesting an accommodation. So I really want to be clear here. The intention with coming up with accommodation is not finding the perfect accommodation. An employee may approach you as an HR manager or as a manager within the organization, have a request. It doesn't necessarily mean that the employer has to do everything the employee has asked. It really is trying to find that balance. And the only way you can really do that is making sure that you're involving as many stakeholders as possible and really talking and listening to the employee. So again, so the law for duty to accommodate is really in place to ensure full participation in the workplace. And even the example I gave at the start with those employees, again, being Muslim had nothing to do with their role with the organization, but if they weren't able to be Muslim while they were at work, they weren't able to be at work. So this is really about trying to get full participation in the workplace. So accommodation generally means making changes to certain rules, standards, policies, and physical environments to ensure that they do not have a negative effect on employees because of any of the protected grounds. Okay, so then duty to accommodate refers to an employer's obligation to take appropriate steps to eliminate discrimination against employees and potential employees. So I want to be clear here. All employers have an obligation to take appropriate steps. Doesn't mean the employer always needs to say yes. Doesn't mean the employer always needs to accommodate, but employer always needs to try. It's the try that's important. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So again, accommodation is a way to balance the diverse needs of individuals and groups in our society. It may cause some inconvenience, disruption, and it may also cause some cost as well. Here at the University of Calgary, they've been really, really supportive of students and their religious observances, and they are funding approximately $500,000 here to build multi-faith prayer spaces here on campus to do some renovation. And again, for some companies, $500,000 would break the bank. They couldn't do that. So that would be something we would understand to be undue hardship. But the University of Calgary has a very, very large budget. So they're able to put in that kind of investment to support a protected ground so students can participate in their academic life. So that's an example of what we're talking about here.
Adriana, sorry to interrupt you here, but I was just going to add a little piece about we've been doing employer interviews in Central Alberta and asking them about what kinds of things that they've done to promote a diverse workforce. And one company stood out in particular, and it was INEOS, which is a chemical and plastics manufacturing company, and they talked about what they do for accommodation, and what they basically do is they just talk with each employee and find out what it is that they could do together on a one-on-one basis, and they found that it's cost them nothing. And one example was that Sikh employees with beards. So instead of saying, "Oh, you have to cut the beard off," they said, "Well, we need a good seal for the ventilator mask before you start working. So, is there a way you could trim your beard around the ventilator?" And everybody that was working for them that was Sikh said, "Oh, that's no problem." They went to the washroom with a little pair of scissors and trimmed their beard just slightly so that they could get a good seal and went back to work. So the safety was there, the accommodation was there, and it cost nothing, and nobody had any of their rights compromised in any way. And I just thought that was a great story, and I just had to jump in and tell it because it hit me all of a sudden when you were talking about costs.
Yeah, no, you bet. And
like sometimes it could be costly, but sometimes it costs nothing. It's just the price of a short conversation with somebody.
Oh, very much so. And I think the fear is as well from a lot of employers is that if I accommodate one person, I'm going to have 50,000 people lined up at my door making the same request. And the statistics have shown, the research has shown that that's not the case. And at least from a legal perspective, an employer's responsibility is to handle these on a case-by-case basis. Please, I want to make very, very clear that just because you provide an accommodation for 1 or 2 or 5 employees does not mean that you need to provide it for every single employee. So, for example, if you're an employer that has, for instance, a large Muslim population, maybe 60% of your population or of your workforce, and they all need time off for Ramadan, all of a sudden, if you have 60% of your workforce asking for several days off, if not longer, during the summer months, maybe having 1 or 2 or 3 employees off is not going to cause undue hardship. But if 60% of your workforce is all asking for the time off, then that's something that would be deemed to be undue hardship. You could no longer function as an employer and to provide services to your customers. So again, it really depends. So at what point will it become undue hardship? And that's what's really clear with the courts and the case law.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah. We're just going to talk a little bit more about that. So again, undue hardship, 3 of the main areas where undue hardship comes up is health, safety, and cost. And I just also want to be clear here. The Supreme Court of Canada has ruled that undue hardship needs to be substantial in nature, needs to be underlined, italicized, flashing letters, meaning, well, I just don't feel like doing it, is not a form of undue hardship. It needs to be significant. So some of the factors for determining undue hardship, again, are the financial costs. So the example I gave you of the University of Calgary, again, our budget allows us to be able to spend that much money to provide a space for students to observe their religion. However, some family business that doesn't have that kind of money, that would be seen as undue hardship. So again, it's relative to your situation and to your organization. Again, another one is whether there's a health and safety risk to the employee or others, the amount of risk and who will bear it. So again, Marie gave a great example of the H2S mask. Again, if they're able to trim their beards, that's great. But if you get an employee who says, no, I can't, then the health and safety risk is going to outweigh the accommodation. And if an employee can't put on an H2S mask, that's going to be problematic. They'll die if there's a leak. So again, you need to weigh those, balance those risks. Again, looking at how difficult it is to modify the job. You need to look at impacts on rights established by a collective agreement. That's another piece too. So make sure if you are a unionized environment that you are always including the union when you're looking at accommodation. Impact on other employees and problems of morale can also be seen as an undue hardship. And again, if there's any impact, if any, on the public. So those are some things that are around undue hardship. So I just want to get into a bit of the religious literacy piece. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the observances from some communities that you may encounter. And I want to be very, very clear here that there is a spectrum of observance. As you may or may not know, not everyone observes their religion the same way, and that's really, really critical. So just because you see someone who may look Jewish or look Muslim or look Christian who works for you doesn't mean that they may have an accommodation request. So the only way that you're going to know is if you ask, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So don't be daunted by these heavy text-heavy slides. If you see the URL on the bottom, as well as I'm going to have a slide at the very end that's a link to that publication. It's actually a great resource that the government, the Department of National Defense, actually put together that I've summarized. So this is me just highlighting some of the communities that typically come up for religious accommodation requests. Again, it's not all encompassing. There's tons more communities that aren't even covered here. So for Christianity, some of the communities that you may receive requests from are the Eastern Orthodox community, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Seventh-day Adventists. So I've broken it down between dress requirements, dietary considerations, and that's something I just want to touch on a little bit. I try and really encourage people to use the word dietary considerations, not dietary restrictions, because again, we want to make sure that we're creating an inclusive workplace, and the term restriction implies that there's something restrictive on their decision to not eat certain kinds of foods, and that's presumptive. So we want to make sure we use the word consideration to say, you know, yeah, you're vegetarian, that's great, just let us know kind of thing. So again, it's a consideration, not necessarily a restriction. Then I highlighted some of the major holidays that you may get some requests from, some other observances you may want to know about, and then I also highlight some mourning and grieving rights, because again, some employees may request for time off. So I do just want to highlight some may need more time off than others or during certain periods. So again, for the Eastern Orthodox community, really the major thing with the holidays is that their holidays, they follow a different calendar. So actually for the Eastern Orthodox community, Christmas does not fall on the same day as it's observed here as a holiday in Canada. Christmas actually falls in January. So that's something just to keep in mind. Again, depending on the particular religious holidays or day of the week, fasting may be involved, so that may affect an employee's productivity. And again, Orthodox funerals consist of 3 services. So again, an employee may ask to have the 3rd, 9th, or 40th days off from their workplace in order to observe a memorial service. For Jehovah's Witness, again, no real dress requirements. Many do not eat food containing blood or blood products. Many do not smoke. Generally, they only observe the annual memorial of the death of Christ. Many know that birthdays and Christmas are not observed. Again, they usually meet weekly in kingdom halls or at homes for Bible studies. And last rites are inappropriate, and burial is by family decision. For Seventh-day Adventists, again, dress is often simple or modest. They often observe a healthy diet. Unclean foods that are identified in the Bible are not allowed. And again, typically, they do not consume alcohol, tobacco, or drugs. For major holidays, they celebrate communion 4 times a year, and then observe the Sabbath from sunset on Friday to sunset on Saturday. So I'm just going to scoot through these a bit. Again, there's a lot of information. So for Hinduism, some of the main things here is many are vegetarian. Again, they do follow a different calendar, so a lunar calendar, so their major holidays actually change every year. Again, most of their worship in Canada falls on Saturdays or Sundays. And then for mourning or grieving rites, again, the ceremony to honor the deceased is held between the 11th and 31st day after death. And many prefer to die at home, so that may include travel for those who identify as Hindu back to India or back to their home country. So just a note on that. For Islam, again, dress is usually modest. As you may know, some women may wear a hijab or a niqab, depending on which community of Islam they are from. Again, some men may wear a beard. Many of you may know around halal. I've got a resource at the end I will show you to learn more about that. Again, their holidays are on a lunar calendar, so again, they change every year. Some of the big ones are Ramadan, as many of you know, Eid, and the celebration of the birth of the Prophet. Many do pray 5 times a day, and then there's a congregational prayer around noon on Fridays. So I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about some did you know facts. So did you guys know that according to the 2012 National Household Survey that was conducted, that Brooks has the highest percentage of Muslims relative to its population here in Alberta? So I thought that was an interesting bit of information.
If anybody wants to comment on that, feel free to type it into the chat box. So you're all on mute for the time being. We might be able to unmute at the end of the presentation. So Subi says it's interesting. That's great.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your comments, Subi. I hope the others feel free to type in some comments because it's all really interesting stuff.
And I definitely would have thought Calgary or Edmonton, just again relative to population, but no, Brooks is at about 7.1% of its population is Muslim.
Yeah, I did a couple of contracts in Brooks, and both of the employers had approximately 1/4 of their employees were Muslim, which is quite high.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so we'll continue on here then. So then with Judaism, so again, this one's a bit lengthy. So again, you may have seen men wearing a kippah or the head covering. Again, there's some other dress requirements listed there. Again, many of you may be familiar with kosher dietary laws, which again vary by community. Again, there's a big spectrum of observance. Some are, I've met tons of Jews who will eat pork, and then tons who are very, very, very observant kosher dietary laws. So again, it really depends. Again, they follow a lunar calendar, so the dates change every year. So here's some holidays listed. The big thing is really about the Sabbath, so it's about from 18 minutes before sunset on Friday until 42 minutes after sunset on Saturday. So that depends, again, depending on the individual. They may not be able to work, be on public transportation, they can't drive, they can't turn on lights. So it really, really depends. And then here's some highlights here about mourning and grieving rites. Then with Sikhism, so just a little tidbit too, it's not Sikh, it's actually Sikh is how you pronounce it. So that's just a little tidbit. So some of the dress requirements are the 5 Ks, the 5 Khalsa, which is the hair, the comb, the undergarment, the ceremonial dagger, and the steel bracelet. So those are some dress requirements. And again, many, both men and women, will wear turbans or headscarves. So they won't, this is an interesting piece. Sikhs will not eat food or meat killed in a ritual way, so they will not eat halal or kosher foods. Many may practice vegetarianism. Again, they have a different calendar, so some holidays are highlighted here. And then some other days of observance follow the birthday or some of the gurus. And again, you're going to see some specific mourning and grieving rites here. And I see Subi asking here, what does Israeli Independence Day have to do with religion? That's an excellent question and quite complex to answer over this call. But many Jews, not all, but many Jews identify as Zionists, so definitely they're linked to their, what they view to be their homeland, Israel, is linked to their religion. So that's going to be the short answer for that question, but that's a great question. So again, another poll here. Which of these religious accommodations have you experienced or had requests from in the workplace? So just take a few seconds to fill these out.
This is another poll where you can choose any number of boxes, so not just one, but to any that apply. And if they haven't applied to you, if you've heard of them apply to the workplace, you could also click that. So I'm going to skip to the results right now.
So
interesting.
Diet. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. What do you think about this poll, Adriana? Does that reflect what you have also experienced, or is it different?
For again, on campus, it's a little different. I'd say the biggest request has been around prayer space. But I do hear dietary restrictions, definitely some of the concerns. We're getting more and more halal options on campus, but again, still do not have any kosher options. So we do get some feedback from students about that. So, no, that's really interesting.
Is it possible for you to speak a little bit about the difference between kosher and halal?
You bet. So again, depending on Muslims and Jews, some will actually eat, if you're Jewish, they may still eat halal meat and vice versa. But typically, halal and kosher meat needs to be killed in a ritualized way. So it's the animal is killed in a certain way. And for halal, the animal is also, the person who slaughters the animal needs to also be Muslim. So again, it varies a little bit, but typically they will need to consume meat that is prepared in that way. Additionally, for Jews, for kosher, they are unable to for some, are unable to eat meat and dairy together. Again, there's a passage in the Bible that prevents that. So you will have, in some quite strict observant Jewish households, they'll actually have 2 kitchens, 2 prep areas, 2 sets of ovens, 2 sets of stoves, 2 sets of dishes, because there cannot be any cross-contamination between meat and dairy. And then again, for halal, typically it's the meat needs to be killed in a ritualized way. They can't eat certain parts of the animal, so you'll find things like gelatin, so certain yogurts they can't eat, certain cheeses they can't eat because it has certain parts of the animal that they are forbidden from eating. So again, it really varies, but again, I've got some resources, especially on halal foods, that I can give you at the end.
But probably before people start running to try and find a big long list and seeing if they can accommodate all of them, they should check with their colleagues or their employees first and see what is it that people observe, right?
You bet. Because again, it really depends. Like I said, I've met lots of Jewish folks who will eat pork and lots who will not. So it really, really depends. And again, I think talking to your employees is a great way to gauge whether or not trying to provide, like if you have a staff cafeteria in your workplace, finding that out in advance to provide that, I think is a great thing to do.
Adriana, sorry, I have another question I wanted to ask you.
Yep.
Is it helpful for employers to refer to the multi-faith calendar to determine holy days and general kinds of observances?
Yes, so I'm going to talk a little bit. Again, there's a great interfaith calendar that's available online that I've got a link for at the end, as well as if any of you are familiar with the multi-faith calendar, the physical one. I don't know if any of you have seen it. You can order it online, and it's actually great because they're starting to put asterisks next to major religious holidays in the calendar that may require religious accommodation. So it's actually a really handy tool. If you just Google multi-faith calendar, you can actually order some. It's a great tool that you can use in your workplace, and I actually purchase a bunch and give it to people here on campus, so it's really great.
Thank you. Looks like Subi has a question, or actually a comment that might be helpful for people to know.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Subi. Thanks. You're right. It really depends on the individual. I've had, the impression that it comes from pigs only. Again, the cow's hooves, I've had Muslims tell me that again. The cow's hooves, because they can't certify that the cow was slaughtered in a halal way, they won't have it. So you bet, it definitely varies. So thanks for adding to that, Subi. It really depends on the background and the individual.
So just to clarify a bit, Subi said she comes from a Muslim background, and the issue with yogurt and Jell-O is not gelatin per se, which comes from bones of animals. It's she said that gelatin comes from pigs only. So not everybody can see the comments in the chat box. So that's why I'm just clarifying that.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Okay. Another did you know, again, to the same National Household Survey, did you know that the second largest religious community in Lethbridge is Buddhism? This actually really surprised me. I didn't know that. So again, if anyone wants to make any comments in the chat box, I thought that was an interesting piece of information here. Anyone from Lethbridge on the call?
There might be. Mariana is from Lethbridge,
okay.
And I'm trying to see somebody else who's there. Not everybody's name comes up. It depends on how they logged in.
No, you bet.
But, yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm not too sure if it is related to a particular ethnic community. That's something I didn't look at. But, yes, typically Southeast Asian communities will identify as Buddhist amongst many other religious communities. So that could very well be it. So just some kind of final things I just want to summarize here. So as employers, you really want to consider the nature of the religious observance. If you do have a particular uniform or dress code, what is the reason for that? Are there alternative measures that can be taken to accommodate the person? That's really what the courts are going to look for if you ever do get a complaint filed. They're going to say, have you explored all possible options? Again, you should be looking at any potential health and safety hazards and whether such hazards would constitute undue hardship for the employer. Again, as I mentioned, just summarizing here, so responding on a case-by-case basis is really important. Again, as I mentioned, consulting with unions is also really critical. And then communicating with other employees to avoid rumors and negative comments. I mean, I worked in a workplace once where there were several Mormon employees working there, and they received Sunday off. And I was working at a hotel, and we operated 24/7. And I had some staff in the department just complain. They said, oh, well, I guess maybe I should just convert to Mormonism so I can get Sundays off. So a lot of comments that came up because there wasn't an understanding of the need to have the Sunday off. So again, I think it's really important if you're in a role as a manager or an HR that you really do try and nip those negative comments in the bud before it creates that negative workplace culture. And again, I think the biggest thing here is when in doubt, ask. I think that's really what we're talking about here. And I know sometimes people feel really uncomfortable about how do you ask. Is it appropriate? I thought religion was a private matter. I think these are all really good thoughts and feelings. And I think as we start changing and moving, and I think as our communities start growing and becoming more diverse, I think it's really important. And I think as Marie mentioned with her example, that particular company decided to have sit-down one-on-one meetings with their employees, and they asked them. And it was a great way for them to build support in an inclusive workplace environment. And then the last slide here, again, is around some of those resources. So to my understanding, this presentation will be made available to you. So that interfaith calendar is a great, great one. I mean, they've got every religion possible listed on there. It's fantastic. That second resource is that one that the table that I had on there is where I gathered a lot of that information from, the religions in Canada. Again, there's some great ones from Alberta Health Services here, and a practical reference guide for police, I believe, in Australia. Those next 2 points, which again just gives some really practical information on how to work with employees or community members from a variety of different cultural and religious backgrounds. And then the last one's actually comes out of the States, and it's a great resource, an employer's guide to Islamic religious practices, just because I know typically many or the majority of requests that come in tend to be from the Muslim community. So I thought this was a great resource that you may want to utilize as well.
Thank you very much for compiling that list, because it's very helpful. And I found, Adriana, I downloaded, I think, all of them, except I already have Interfaith, but I downloaded all of them after speaking with you yesterday. And the one that really surprised me was the Enhancing Cultural Competency for Alberta Health Services. They have a huge, long list of very specific things per culture that you can look up. So you can go, oh, okay, if this is the norm, I might want to ask people, do you follow this norm? So it's just such a useful reference guide. And also the one from National Defense, there's just so much good information in there that you can just keep it handy and check on it regularly.
You bet, you bet.
So this is, I think we've reached the end of Adriana's presentation, which was so interesting, and I would like to hear from Adriana much longer and on several occasions because she has so much useful information to share with us. A few things that came out for me was that really clear point near the beginning that making accommodations is the responsibility of both the employer and the employees together to collaborate and find a balance. That really struck me. And then also when Adriana was talking about undue hardship, that the three main things to consider when you're thinking about undue hardship is there a health concern, is there a safety concern, and is there a cost concern? And looking at those things with the intent to be willing to accommodate is the idea, not just to say, oh, I didn't feel like it, or this is going to be too costly when you haven't actually looked into it yet. And then the other thing that really struck me was the importance of looking at the spectrum of observance. Not everybody observes their religion in the same way, and the only way you're going to know is if you ask.
Exactly.
So to me, those were really important points, but that's just what stuck out with me, and I'm wondering if other people have some questions or comments that they would like Adriana to answer, because this is the time to do it. Now, Subi's got a few.
Yeah, I see that here. So, Subi, your first one, do I know of any studies about which group the most or least requests come from? I don't. This is actually a very, very new area, so I'm unaware of any resources or studies done, especially when it comes strictly just to requests, because I don't know of anyone that tracks that data or information. You could, for instance, just because it's part of the public spheres, you could find out which communities file the most complaints through the Alberta Human Rights Commission. And it doesn't mean a complaint is through the public record. It's only if it actually ends up going to the tribunal. So you could maybe look it up that way. I agree. I think it would be a fantastic study, and I'd love to have someone look at that. And then is there a government resource that helps us decide what undue hardship might be? Yes. So please go to the Alberta Human Rights Commission website. There's tons of fantastic resources there on undue hardship. And again, I would really recommend going to one of their workshops. And do know, again, there's contact information for the Alberta Human Rights Commission. You can call them and ask them. They are great resources for that. So there is definitely an outreach and a workshop and a teaching branch of the Human Rights Commission, and then there's the tribunal, which is separate. So do know that they are there to do education and to support employers and employees in Alberta. So I hope that answers your question, Subi.
Yeah, in addition to just paying attention to the resources that are available, I think that whole piece about just trying to find a way to work with people is extremely important. I had a contract with an employer in Brooks where they had a number of Muslim employees who were not really practicing employees that were using the prayer room and the time off for prayer that was granted to them through their union privileges as ways to make phone calls and take longer breaks. And this, of course, was causing abuse from other employees who were also abusing the employment standards. And the employer thought they could do nothing about it. But after sitting down and talking together with a few people, they came up with a really great plan. And the plan was to get an imam from Calgary to come to Brooks and to explain to all the shifts, and then in a hotel to the family members and to the management in 4 different meetings what it actually means to be a good Muslim, no matter what sect you belong to, and what is appropriate for taking breaks. And the imam made it very clear that you can't take a break and use that as a religious privilege as an excuse for bad behavior, that would be considered completely wrong in the eyes of Muhammad. And so the imam found out when he was speaking to the groups of employees that many people didn't have a very strong foundation or understanding of what their religion was, and were confusing various cultural aspects with various religious mandates and practices. And so that was an opportunity to clear it all up, and it actually resolved the problem almost instantly. So the managers in the organization didn't even have to enforce anything after that, because not only did it clear up the problem of abuse of company time by that one demographic, but other employees realized that what they were doing was not appropriate, and they just auto-corrected their behavior. So it raised the standard for the whole company just to address things in that educational way. And I thought that was such a lovely story. I just wanted to share that with everybody.
Yeah, and that's great, and I appreciate you sharing that. And again, I'm glad they came up with a very unique way to deal with the situation, but I do want to be clear that providing accommodation is not an excuse for bad behavior, so don't feel that you can still address the inappropriate behavior and not have anything to do with the accommodation. And it's like that for any kind of accommodation. So, no, I appreciate that story. That's great.
Yeah, because as you pointed out, there's two separate points. Inappropriate behavior is one thing, and accommodation for religion is another.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we have, if people have comments or questions, again, they can type them in. They can also send them to Adriana, because Adriana's contact information is up here. So if you would prefer to email Adriana, or if you'd like to call her about any workplace issue or question that you might have, or perhaps you have a good story that Adriana could add to upcoming presentations that she would probably love to hear from you. So we've got her contact information here. We'll also send you a copy of the PowerPoint from Adriana's presentation today, and a link to the recording. So if you came in late and you would like to listen to the recording, then you know, for the first piece, I think it would be worthwhile, because Adriana made some really good points in the beginning, so feel free to listen again. And you can also share it. It's a shareable link, so other people can listen to it. We generally keep our recordings up for 48 hours, and after that, we have the recording on our website, which is shiftworkplace.com. So that's shiftworkplace, all one word, shiftworkplace.com, and they're under past webinars, and that's where we have the recordings available, and they're usually a pretty nice way to check up on some of the things that we have offered. This is part of a series for employers that Shift Management offers as value add to employers across Canada. Every second month, we do a topic that is specific to best practices for employers, and then in between we do best practices and hot topics for immigrant employees or internationally trained professionals to Canada. And sometimes the topics overlap. So in this case, Adriana's topic is good for both internationally trained individuals seeking or recently employed in Canada, and it's also really good for employers who are looking for some best practices and some pointers for reference materials. So I'd like to thank Adriana one more time. Adriana, do you have a closing comment while I put up the next couple of opinion polls here?
No, again, I really appreciate everyone's time for participating, and I think please feel free to contact me if you do have any questions or concerns. I think really at the end of the day, I can't tell you what to do by any means, but I think hopefully within your workplaces you come up with some kind of process or protocol and how to support requests that do come in. And again, this is really about learning, asking, talking, considering all of the different stakeholders. So I think in the end, if I can just leave everyone with that, that would be great. So again, I really appreciate the idea, the opportunity to share this with you, and thank you.
It looks like Subi has another interesting comment that maybe, Adriana, would you mind sharing that with everybody before we go to our final poll?
Sure. So we have, so the University of Calgary has set up abolition areas actually in MacEwan Student Center, which is the main student building here on campus. And even in the new multi-faith prayer space that we're getting in the dining center, we're installing abolition areas. And so, yeah, there's actually, even if you Google it, you can see what it looks like. And it's basically an appropriate spot to do foot cleansing and washing, and doesn't require an individual to somehow figure out how to hike their feet up into a normal-sized sink. So it prevents health and safety issues, water being splashed all over the place. So it's a really great solution. So we've got several located here on campus that really, really helps out. So I'd really, really recommend it.
That's great. And a low-cost solution I heard about a couple of years ago was that employers just attached a hose onto one of the sinks and then had a basin.
Oh, yep.
So I think it cost them like $10, and then they just put that into all of their washrooms, and that way they also were able to cut down on the splashing. So there are all a variety of costs that people can consider.
Oh, you bet.
This is our last slide. If you haven't already attended one of our webinars in the past, we would love to have you on our contact list. We send out one invitation a month about our upcoming webinars, just so that you've got that. And then 4 times a year, we also send out a newsletter. So it's not a lot of stuff to clog up your inbox, and it's very useful. You can unsubscribe at any time. It's a very clear button for unsubscribing. And so if you haven't been on our mailing list, please sign up, because I think our webinars are really useful for people, and we've had great comments on them. Adriana, thank you so much one more time, and have a wonderful day, and I hope we have a chance to host you again.
Great. Again, thank you, everyone, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.